These dahlias are going to stay in the ground because they're under Neil's frames and we've got very free draining soil. So we've already covered lifting and storing our dahlia tubers, and we've cleared the entire top of the garden already. I'll have to show you that. So these ones are going to stay in the ground under Neil's frames, and I'm going to take you through the whole process now. You can see how tall the dahlias were. So the first thing we're doing is we're chopping down the foliage so we can get these frames off, because Neil wants to make sure we get rid of all of the debris and weed the bed before we put it to sleep for the winter. And you can see he's chopping the stalks down really small, at 100 miles an hour. Mind your fingers. I'm not taking you to hospital. The smaller you chop the stalks, the quicker they will rot down. If you leave them too big, they never rot down. They take years. You'll come back and you'll find that you've got fibrous stems in a compost bin. Brought you over to the compost bins so you can see. So we're putting the stems on this bin. You can see it's quite high. It will drop quite quickly as the stems start to decompose. As the water and the air leaves them, it will drop really quite rapidly. Within 24 hours you'll see that the bin's significantly gone down. You can get some more in there. Now, if you keep oxygen in your compost bin, and if I step back you can see how big that bin is, the oxygen is never going to get to the bottom of the bin without our intervention. So what we will do is, after a little while, we will turn this compost bin into this empty bay. That will put air back in to the stems, and they will compost much more rapidly with that process than if you just left the bin stagnant, basically to sit there. They might sit there for years. So the more you turn your bin, the quicker the composting process will be. You can see that Neil is cutting the stems right down, so we'll be easily able to lift these frames off, and you can give it a good weed. But there's not that many weeds, Neil.
No, it's because of light.
Yeah, the dahlia foliage is so abundant that it's basically shaded out most of the weed seeds, so they haven't been able to germinate. Doesn't mean that they won't, but fingers crossed, it shouldn't be too bad. So I thought you might like to see how we're getting on. Neil has now completely cut down the dahlias. There's just a few stems left, and he's cut those on an angle so that any water, it's raining at the minute, any water can drain off. But it doesn't matter too much because we're putting in our lids. Now you'll notice that we've got some new covers on the lids. These frames are about 4 or 5 years old now, so there was not much left of the plastic, so we've had to recover them, but the original frames are still in place, and you'll see that they don't fit perfectly. Let me just put my phone back a bit. They don't fit perfectly. There are slight gaps in between the lids, so a little bit of water does get through, not enough to cause any trouble, and the dahlias are positioned underneath the frames well away from those gaps anyway. Do need to screw the lids down. I used to say nailing, but I got told off for that. Screw the lids down, Zoe. You need to, because otherwise the wind will get underneath them, lift them, and they'll take off like a kite, and they could get damaged. So we've been doing this for years now. We will lift the dahlias in January, February time. It depends on the weather. I will show you. So we just don't have enough storage space to keep everything under cover, and we don't like to leave them in the ground year after year. They tend to lose vigour. Anyway, much more about that in the spring, but we'll lift them, we'll check them over, because we don't want any gaps in our flower garden, do we, next year? And we possibly might have a little move around, because it's good to do that from time to time. Oh dear, this is Burlesca, and behind it, I'll say was Labyrinth. They're looking a bit sorry for themselves now, but they gave a magnificent show this summer. I'll run a video for you now of happier times. Never mind, they are coming back. Tuck them up nicely. just remember, you cannot do this. You cannot leave your dahlias in the ground if the ground floods, because we're protecting the rain from coming in overhead and we've got very free draining soil. But if the ground floods, the water will go in sideways, and no matter what protection you've put over the top, they will get to the dahlias, and it is the water more than anything that does most of the damage.